All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Story Business, Ins and Outs of a Professional Game Writer. Welcome to PAX Online. We're so happy that you're here, and thank you for joining us. Before we get started, we're going to go around the table here and meet everyone. My name is Carmen Askerneese. I'm a game writer and a dungeon master for a tabletop actual play show. Who wants to go next? Why don't we toss it to Milo?
Oh, me? Yeah, I can go for it. So what's up, y'all? My name's Milo Smiley. I'm a game writer and producer. Last summer, I had the good fortune of working with Insomniac Games as a writing intern for the upcoming PS5 game, Spider-Man Miles Morales. It'll be pretty cool. Check it out when it comes out. And then I just finished up a really awesome summer working with Blizzard on some production things for their classic games, as well as some writing for some upcoming Heroes of the Storm content. And yeah, outside of that, I do a bit of indie and student game writing. Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Awesome. Kelsey?
Hello. I'm Kelsey Beachum. I'm the writer from Outer Wilds, and I'm currently working at Insomniac. And my most recent work has been on the DLC for the Outer Worlds. I know.
So cool. How about you, Lucas?
Yeah, my name is Lucas Loredo, and I'm a writer whose background is mostly in fiction and travel writing, but as of January, I began work as a narrative designer at Wolfeye Studios, and I'm working on Weird West.
Awesome. And Mallory?
Hey, my name is Mallory Littleton. I'm a staff writer over at Deck 9 Games. We put out Life is Strange Before the Storm a little bit ago, so if you haven't checked that out yet, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. Also, to all of you watching, thank you for submitting your questions. We had so many great questions come in, and we'll do our best to address all of them. As you know, we're all adapting to this new normal. And as such, you're going to see us do a little bit of live tech support because I forgot to mention something before we started recording. So if everybody wants to add your pronouns and your Twitter handles to your video, you can do so by clicking on the 3 ellipses in the top of your, in Zoom, in the top right-hand corner of your video box. So if you click on that and select rename, you can add your pronouns and your social handle if you would like. You don't have to, but just live if you want to do that. Live tech support, right? You love to see it.
It's much better than dead tech support.
It is. Hey,
Too true.
That's yeah. You can't go wrong. So as we read the questions out, I'll try to get your usernames right. Forgive me if I messed them up. So our first question is from AF Narratives. They ask, what are good ways to manage multiple projects at once? And what are best practices for prioritizing your projects? So feel free to, whoever would like to jump in.
Well, Carmen, I know that you're doing freelance. I wonder if you have multiple projects. Or Kelsey, I know you two also, were you working on Outer Wilds and the Outer Worlds at the same time?
I was not, no.
So
my background is a little bit weird because I moonlighted as a games writer for a long time while working a day job and then kind of got into it full time. And then I was actually Insomniac for a while, doing a full-time contract there. And then I was doing full-time, I was doing like bits and pieces. So then I was working on other stuff at the same time. So yeah, thank you for reminding me of that because apparently I've forgotten my work history.
It all runs together.
So I am weirdly one of those people that really relies on paper planners. I really need a physical reminder because if I don't see it, it doesn't exist. It's gone. And so I have a strategy where I use, and this sounds very grade school, but I use different colors to denote what project it is that I'm working on. And I visually map out what my deadlines are for each one. Usually I'm not working on too many projects at once just because personal preference, but usually you kind of have a sense of when things are due, and then if possible, I try to kind of, if nothing else, I impose a deadline on myself so that I'm staggered. I've also found it really helps to build in buffer days if you can. I mean, that's just good scheduling in general, but then that way, if you've got one of your projects has gone a little sideways on you, you have that buffer day in there, so you don't have to go to your other client and say like, hey, so bad news, guys. It's never come up for me, but yeah, building in buffer days has definitely helped prevent that.
Absolutely. I didn't mention this before, but I got my start in games as a streamer, a YouTuber in like 2013. And when I moved into dev and now as a freelancer, I've always worked on multiple projects simultaneously. And it depends on how I manage that. I use a similar system to Kelsey sometimes. I also have a system that I use that is essentially based around deadlines. So whatever's due first or whatever is going to have the highest impact, I'll prioritize that first. And I always work on personal projects outside of work. In those instances, you want to prioritize your paid work first, especially as a freelancer, right? Because you need that paid work to continue being a freelancer to pay your bills. So yeah, finding a system that works best for you. There are tons of tools out there that can help you manage your time, like Trello and a bunch of other scheduling apps that escape my mind at the moment. Also, I use the Notepad and calendar on my phone religiously and set reminders because I would never remember or get anything done without reminders. Yeah, does anybody have anything else on that before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I would love to add just one thing because the question asked is a great one. And I would also say that, you know, another part of that question, I think, too, which feels important to talk about in writing spaces and art spaces in general is sort of what you have to do to earn your living while you're still trying to get your start in the art world. And so for me personally, I was living in New York when I first graduated from college, and I was working as a tutor, and all of the work I was doing to earn my living was after school. And so that meant that my entire morning and my early afternoon I could devote to my own writing projects, which was really, really essential to me getting, developing my craft and getting a sort of like, a base of work that I could use as a portfolio. And so, you know, I think along with managing multiple projects at once, I think maybe even a more apropos thing if people are trying to get into the industry to begin with is how do you make the work that you have to do to earn your income, how do you make that work with your creative practice and your creative life? And for me, that was what is the highest hourly rate I can get and the least amount of time I can spend on work that isn't my creative work so that I have the maximum number of hours during the day when I'm freshest and when I do my best creative work to work on my own personal projects. And that was like 3 or 4 years of my life before I ended up getting a writing fellowship. So I think that's maybe a part of the conversation too that I just wanted to mention.
Absolutely, thank you. And thank you for your question. So our next question is from Fructose on Twitter. They ask, how do you practice your writing? Yeah, I'll go first. So one thing that I do is, so I have two parts of this. Like one thing I do is take a lot of classes. And I want to preface that by saying that I'm a person who hates school. And I've been trying to like analyze that about myself recently because, you know, I've graduated a while ago from graduate school and I was thinking about like, why do I hate school so much? And what I landed on is I hate school because to me, there was no practical application for it. And I found that when I went to graduate school, which was more specific towards game development and what I wanted to do, I enjoyed it a lot more. And now the classes that I take aren't centered around grades or learning how to pass the class, but learning how to master a particular craft or actually produce something that will be a resume piece or something that you could potentially create as a valuable product. So to me, that had more value than like going to regular school. So that's a long way to say, like, there are tons of people in the industry that you can learn from, and you're an eternal student, especially as a writer, and especially if you're writing for various mediums.
I'm a big fan of finding sneaky ways to write in the middle of your day. So I like it's an app called the Most Dangerous Writing app, where you have to be typing constantly for 2 minutes or it deletes everything. I use that sometimes if I'm stuck on a line of dialogue at work, or I can't figure out how to put this piece of blocking. Sometimes just having to get something down can really help. But as far as practice goes, sometimes it's fun. You can sit down with a movie or a TV show that you really like, a scene that you really like, and particularly one where you have the screenplay available, and get the lines of dialogue memorized, look at the blocking, and sit down and try to write that scene from scratch as if you were writing it yourself. And then once you're done, you can compare it with the original work and compare and contrast and learn interesting tricks that way. I have a lot of these. I could go on for a very long time.
Those are so great. I love
I need a
those.
blog on that. You should do that.
I also love the Most Dangerous Writing app.
It's
Oh
nuts,
gosh,
man.
the pressure is beautiful. It's amazing. Just blow it all up if you don't write fast enough.
I came up through screenwriting, so a lot of the writing that I go to write, and a lot of the writing that I do for work is very similar to screenwriting for film. And I'm also a big fan of taking like one scene or one funny bit from my day and writing that scene as a script and finding ways to punch it up and make it more interesting, and just be thinking in that kind of visual space for me in screenwriting, or in that narrative space, or that fiction space.
Yeah.
Give myself homework, Carmen. I'm so sorry. I love school. I'm a giant nerd. I set aside a little, like a chunk in the morning usually of time where I'm doing abstract stuff, because I'm doing this as my day job, which is like, oh, nice, awesome, amazing. But it takes time to get there. And so I build in like an hour at least in the morning usually, and I give myself little like, just taking like RPG stats and then challenging myself to rename them if I were going to make like a Western. I do a lot of weird, little like genre exercises like that. And I keep a running tally of skills that I want to actively get better at. So I think having kind of a targeted list of things that you want to improve on. I'm not saying don't set aside space for just writing for fun and everything. Definitely do that. But if there's something that you want to work at that you're not particularly good at, that's definitely something I do. And I make a lot of lists. I've got a list going right now of words I am forbidden to type for the next like 48 hours or so, because I've used them too much today in writing. So it's, I need the word so badly. But yeah, just giving myself some creative challenges. A really good one I have found is to take something that, like a game that you thought the narrative fell a little bit short on, and kind of give yourself like, all right, if I had X amount of time and Y resources, what would I do to maybe revamp that narrative to tell the story in a more effective way? Because thinking critically about the games you're playing is, I think, hugely, it's just such a central part of what we do for work. So that's a big one.
Yeah, cute. All of those are such good points. Especially, I want to add on to the last one a little bit. Like, it may not seem like practicing writing, but I feel like consuming media outside of writing and learning how to talk about that critically, like you said, is so important for like developing writing skills. Also, because like so much of writing is pitching ideas to people who may not be as passionate about the story as you are. Figuring out how to talk about media is just like such an important skill for practicing your writing, and it'll inform your writing indirectly as well, because you'll be able to see like what devices pieces of media use well, or like how they characterize a certain thing or set up like a world. And I think that's like a really good way to practice if you don't want to just like dive in and do like new original concept every single time.
And the other thing I think Kelsey brought up that's really worth talking about is that game writing really runs the gamut, from writing full scenes and entire narrative movements to having to come up with the name of the 300th revolver that you can find, and coming up with clever descriptions for that. So I think that's something that's really interesting about games, and something to keep in mind is that someone does have to write all that stuff, and it could be you.
Yeah, I love that point, because I feel like I wrote in a number of different media before I was in games. I was writing a lot of prose, fiction, and nonfiction. I also wrote some plays and some short films, some immersive theater, all sorts of stuff. But I feel like game writing requires the most versatility out of any of the writing that I've done so far. And so I think that's why sort of like all of our suggestions, they sort of run the gamut. And even I think my suggestion, or one of the things that I can add to the great pool already for practicing writing, because I come from a prose background, I would do things like, for me, it was more like getting used to producing volume, because I was working on some longer works, some novel length stuff. And when I first started writing, it was really hard to imagine putting 80,000 words down onto a page, and sort of like learning to turn that inner critic off. I don't know how your relationship with your inner critic, I don't know if it's like way up here or way down here or somewhere in the middle. But I feel like one of the best things that I did in my fiction writing training was sort of like learning how to produce a volume of words and to produce a volume of material that I can sort of shape and sculpt later without being very precious about the material itself. And so the ways that I did that were, I highly suggest, if anyone's feeling blocked, to either get the Most Dangerous Writing app, because that sounds amazing. And also, I did National Novel Writing Month. So I don't know if people are familiar with this. November is National Novel Writing Month, which is coming up in the not too distant future. And you write 50,000 words in 30 days, which requires 1,600 words every day, 7 days a week for a month. And because you're writing at such an incredible pace, I found it was the perfect thing in my young writing career to get me past the thought of writer's block as a thing that exists. I'm like, I just decided I wasn't going to operate that way. It's like, if I feel blocked, I'm just going to actually write 2,000 words of drivel, because at least the faucet's open and I can sort of write myself into something good maybe eventually, as opposed to just sitting there and looking at the blank page. So for me, I would say, in terms of like smaller writing exercises on a daily basis, I mean, for me, for years, I just wrote 1,000 words every day, 1,000 words every day, 5 days a week, like it was my job. And over the years, I feel like that really sort of like trained that muscle of production that's really, really served me well now.
Yes.
Guys, I'm going to be real weird for a minute, but my fan is going like crazy, and I'm blinking so much, you're going to start thinking I'm a simulation. So like, I'm going to cross the room and just turn my fan down to a setting that isn't, desert.
Yeah.
That's fair. Thank you all so much for that incredible insight. Thank you for your question. Yes, like everyone said, you just have to be constantly writing. So yeah, thank you so much. Once Kelsey gets back, we'll jump to our next question. Awesome. So our next question is, what is a good way to break into game writing after college? And this is from Dumari Oliver on Twitter.
Wait, video games. Nailed it. I know, that sounds like
That's it, we're done.
It sounds like I'm being sarcastic, but I'm actually not. The best way to find out how to write games and like find out if you like writing video games is to write a video game. You could start with interactive fiction. I recommend Twitch to people all the time if you want to get a feel for that. It's essentially like, at its most basic function, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure novel, and then you can do a ton of stuff with it. It's very cool.
Did you mean Twine?
What did I say?
Twitch. No, it's cool.
Well,
I just
Write on Twine and stream it on Twitch.
Yeah,
Stream your writing
write
on
something on
Twitch.
Twine, stream it on Twitch.
It's this new thing. You haven't heard of it. Guys, I'm so sorry. It's been a week. Yes, Twine. Sorry. Twine is brilliant for that. I'm sure you can do things on Twitch too, but that's your prerogative. Also, if you out of college is a little harder, but I spent a few years living in Chicago, and there's a pretty thriving indie dev scene there. So if you can find even just one other person to work with, you'll get that sense right away of, you know, all our teachers harped on it in school, like, oh, you'll have to learn how to work with people in the real world. It's not the same as a group project. When you're working with someone that like really passionately also wants to make a game the same as you, like, oh boy, it's a good time.
Yeah, I will say, as someone who started off wanting to be a film director, and because I didn't know games was a real option until I graduated school, when I tried to find people to make films, because I was like, oh, if I want to make films, I need to make films. It was so hard to find people to make films and to like stick with it till the end. But with this thing about the gaming industry is like, I think folks are so passionate about it, like Kelsey was saying, that if you search for it, you'll be able to find folks to work with. And, you know, going to game jams, going to conventions are great ways to meet people who you can make prototypes with to start to build a portfolio. And I have a bunch of resources for you. So I hope that you have a pen. Do you have one? I'm gonna wait. Okay, you have one now. So Twine, right, like Kelsey mentioned, use that to make stuff. Go to workwithindies.com. There's a lot of freelance work on there. There's a website called Grackle HQ. There are a lot of game development jobs that are posted on there. And as a student out of college, you probably can't qualify for those jobs right now, but you can look at them for things that you're interested in, career aspirations, and find out what you need to, what skill sets you need to build to get to that point. And there are so many opportunities for internships for college graduates. So I would say check Game Dev Map as well. Game Dev Map, Game Dev World. It's Game Dev Map, I think. I haven't been on it in a while. But you can see every registered game studio in the whole world on this website. So go to sites of studios that you enjoy their games every day. And that's not a joke, like go there every day and see what opportunities are available, meet developers and continue to build that portfolio. And, you know, the thing is like getting into games is hard and staying in games is harder. So signing up for this industry is hard, but it's what you love. And you'll have fun along the way. So just be willing to put in that work and people will be here to support you. Awesome. Well, if anybody has anything else, go for it. If not, then I'm going to jump to the next question. So our next question comes from Amaya on Twitter. They ask, how do narrative designers and game writers collaborate?
So I can speak to that from my own perspective, working within narrative games and the Life is Strange franchise in particular. And it's a little bit odd in games in that we really start with the story and the writing first when we approach that question. So we sort of take a scene or you know, an episode, let's say, and we understand the arc that we want the characters to go on. We understand the emotional journey we want. We understand how we want to force the player to make hard choices and how those choices will affect the character and therefore the world, right? And once we have our sort of structure for the episode in place, we start looking for ways to let the player through gameplay actually interact with that story and with the emotions and the goings on that are important to our characters. And from that perspective, we say to our design team, okay, so how can we really embody the way that betrayal feels? How do we make anger into gameplay? And that's a little bit kind of odd within the industry, but that's how we approach it, sort of from the narrative angle first, and then we look for gameplay to give the player agency in that story and to let them really embody it in a way that only games can do.
Awesome. Yeah, I just
Probably,
like to, oh, sorry. Go for it.
No, all I was going to say was that the weirdest part, I think, well, I don't know about the weirdest. One of the weirdest parts about our jobs as game writers is that relationship between writer or narrative designer and your other types of designers, your gameplay or area design or what have you, is that it's always going to be different from person to person and from project to project and from studio to studio. Gosh, so there's no one definitive model for what that looks like. And part of the job is kind of learning how to best interact with people in that way. And I think it's actually worth noting that if you're looking for a job at a game studio, try to look for one that has a model for that system that you like. Because ideally, I think the more interaction there is between writing and design, the better. And the more that the more they reflect each other, the more they're happening at the same time and evolving, I think the better your game is going to feel for the most part.
Definitely. I second that big time. And I 1,000,000% second what you said about each level designer. So the game I'm working on right now has a handful of level designers, and you're so right that every relationship is different, and each level designer needs something different from me as the narrative designer and as the writer. And so I think it cannot be overstated how important communication skills are when you are writing for games and when you're a narrative designer or a writer, both, because there's so much communication that needs to happen between so many different departments, and everyone sort of approaches the game with a different language that they're speaking. And so I don't know how it feels for you all, but oftentimes I feel like, at least in narrative design, a big part of my work is translating people's desires to other departments to make sure that we're all on the same page, and trying to keep the overall gameplay and story arc intermeshed, like Mallory was talking about, like this, and making sure that each department that sort of contributes to that we're all working towards that mesh of gameplay and story. So, oh man, so much communication. Please be friends with your designers. Just be best friends. Check in with them every morning. Hey, how you doing? How's the level design coming along? What do you need me for? That sort of stuff. Like, a lot of my job is that. And so I feel like those relationships, when they're strong, the work is so much better, because so much of this story and gameplay are so intermeshed, or at least should be, in games, that the more you can be enmeshed with, the more writers can be enmeshed with their designers, the better all of that will be.
Yeah, 100%. All of that, so much. You definitely want to be best friends with everyone on the team if you can, just because I think writing touches every single department before it gets into a game. So it's you want to make sure everyone is on the same page about what a scene is meant to convey. I also feel like writing is always better when you have more people who have looked over it before it reaches something. So I don't know, you might be surprised. You might get a cool idea for a scene or a situation or a line of dialogue from the engineering team or the technical art team. I would definitely keeping those lines of communication open is honestly so incredibly important, while at the same time recognizing that you're going to be the key advocate for the story, no matter how narratively intense a game is. And you're going to be the one who has to convey the story and what happens in every single beat, making sure you're able to just show other people that, or just communicate that, I think is very key to the writer-designer relationship, especially.
Absolutely.
All devs are storytellers.
Yeah,
they are.
Yes, really good points there.
Thank you all so much for that insight. Thank you for your question. I'm going to go to the next question. Just real quick, can y'all hear my washing machine? No? Okay, good, cool. Because it's going crazy, and I'm like, ooh, I hope they can't hear that. Anyway, another question from actually a couple more. So thank you for all of your questions. We're going to answer all of your questions. And this next question is, are knowing other aspects of game dev, like programming, art, helpful, even if you want to focus on game writing?
Definitely more so if you're working on indie games, but yes, in general. I just asked the art director the other day how a particular thing worked, and I will never be asked to do that thing, even if the entire art team were to be hit by a squadron of buses. I certainly hope that doesn't happen. They're wonderful people. But point being, buses aside, it's useful to know these things for me, because then when I am, say, pitching a new quest, or suggesting a particular story arc that's going to require assets from other people, from other departments, then I have a better sense of, am I asking art to do a tremendous amount of work and I just don't realize it? Because sometimes what happens when you're pitching things, you accidentally pitch something where lighting is like, that is a nightmare, why would you say that? And the connecting bit between I have asked them to do something unreasonable and them saying no, sometimes you miss that bit in the middle. A lot of arcs in this meeting, man. Sometimes you miss that middle bit in which art is like, yeah, that here is specifically because they don't know what's in your head, they don't know why you're asking for this. And so sometimes when I pitch an idea, they're looking at the literal idea and they're saying, we can't implement that, when I'm actually looking for, I'm trying to accomplish a particular thing, and that is an example. So just having a good sense of that sort of thing can really help. Also, it can help you, narrative design is a discipline where you're telling story through all of these different aspects of the game. It's not just the text. And if you thought it was just the text, oh boy. Sorry, I've had some experiences there. Just, yeah, no, getting a sense of the different colors you're painting with, essentially, I think is always a useful thing, but you don't have to be, a master programmer, no.
It's also useful, particularly in writing, because you are, to a certain extent, creating something that other people are going to work off to create their own work. It's the more you can find out about the way that the other teams in your studio or your partner on your indie project or whatever, the more you understand how they work, the better you can foresee things that may become problematic and solve those problems before they end up costing you a lot of time or money. And that's always tremendously beneficial. And then, like Kelsey said, when you realize that you are asking for something really expensive, you can either decide to not ask for that or decide that it's worth it and know that it's expensive and be prepared to make that case. So yeah, everything that you can learn about the people that you work with will help you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My next question is, any tips for breaking into the industry?
Getting really lucky. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like for breaking into the industry, I feel like what you need, like the key things, is like a solid portfolio of your work, even if it's like less is more. If you have like a few concrete examples of your writing where you show that you understand not only how to write like well and write tightly, but also write with interactivity in mind, I think is super important. Also just like, I think like getting your name out there is really important. Maybe even like applying to positions that you don't have all of the qualifications for, but if you meet all of like the major beats and some of the minor ones, I would say like go for it. Because even if you don't get it, they have your name now on file. And if you apply for something in the future that maybe more closely matches your qualifications, it's like, hey, I remember you applied like 3 years ago, and now I got to see you like grow. And also you're like a person to me now instead of just a piece of paper. Like, I think like those are so important. Also, like, I would definitely say, like figuring out like if you have like a very specific goal in mind of like somewhere you want to work, maybe understanding like what the narrative is like there on their projects and like how you can best formulate your writing to like match that, to show that not only are you a good writer, but like you also understand how things like work in terms of narrative beats from an outside perspective, and you'd be able to like mesh into that team really smoothly. I think are just a few things you can think about.
I would love to add more to this, but my guess is that other folks on this call, I was going to say had a more traditional route to a game writing job, but there probably are no traditional routes to a game writing job. But it might be useful just for people to hear all the different kinds of routes there are, because I don't think there's any one. For instance, myself, I'm 30, and I got my first game writing job when I was 30. And before then, my whole life had been about writing prose. And then I got my master's degree in creative writing, and I took a game writing course from Susan O'Connor, who's incredible writer, wrote for BioShock and all sorts of stuff. And it was like, I mean, I also can't overstate how important personal connections are with people, and trying to meet people, and just, I feel like a face-to-face conversation or even a video conversation with somebody in the industry who works for a studio you're interested in is worth so much. And I feel like asking people for informational interviews, I mean, this is something you can do if you get into a dialogue with someone on Twitter or something, and you say, could I have 10 minutes of your time? I'll send you like a gift card for your favorite coffee shop. Can I just talk to you for like 10, 15 minutes and ask you some questions over Zoom or something? I feel like just sort of greasing the wheels in terms of some like momentum and energy, making connections with people. That was the way that I ended up getting a job, was because someone I knew someone who was hiring for a job that wasn't even posted. I got this job and it was never posted. And so I feel like, I'm curious for you all, if you got your jobs, I'm just curious, did you get your jobs through a sort of like cold email for a job that was posted on the internet, or did you know someone who knew someone? What was it like for you guys? Because I feel like I was so atypical.
First job or current job? Because first job was dumb luck, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was working on Outer Wilds, and we got some recognition at IGF in 2015, and I was still working in a completely unrelated field then. So that is, luck is always probably going to play a big part in it, to be honest. And to that end, be ready for it. So have something ready, have samples, have a completed, even if it's just a tiny little game, have something you can show people, and have something you can show them that you know how to finish, because there are a lot of starters in the world of writing, and there are not as many finishers. But to actually answer your question, I think I applied online. And I applied online for a different position with them, and they held on to my resume. And then when there was an opening, they were like, "Hey, maybe apply to this." So I don't think I knew anyone there. I knew of some people there. I think I was Twitter friends with somebody. But yeah, no, you don't. It's not. Connections are always helpful, because then you have people looking out for you and saying, "Hey, maybe apply over here. This seems like it could be a good fit for you." But I think for me, it's always boiled down to, do I have something I can show this person right now to show that I know what I'm doing?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, so kind of going off what the other said. Luck is timing and preparation, right? So for myself, it's a long, windy story, and we don't have enough time for me to go in the whole thing. But the short version of how I got my first job is I did what Lucas was talking about, and I set myself up for success because I knew that my portfolio and experience was so different than games, and I didn't feel like I had the skill set to make games, because I was like, I don't even know how to do that. And because of the other work that I'd done, and like Kelsey said, being a finisher, I was able to get into this school called FIA, which is the Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy. I mentioned them so much, you might think I'm sponsored by them, but I'm not. And because I mean, it was super helpful, right? Like, I went there, I learned what it takes to make a game, and all the professors there are former devs, and they have a period during the course of your time there where recruiters come in from various studios and they interview folks. And the process works like, only the folks who have been outstanding in their courses and who have made an impression will get the interviews. I was one of those people who got interviews. I didn't get any of those jobs. I beefed all the interviews. They paid for us to go to GDC. I messed all that up just because, and I think that the lesson here is I was going about it thinking that because I had the education or I had the degree or whatever, and I was the project lead for my thesis project, I was like, oh, cool, then I get the job now, right? But that's not how it works for games, because the thing is, you need to constantly be making projects and prototypes, and that was the only game project I had. So I needed to have a wider breadth of stuff on my portfolio. So, you know, I met some folks who were willing to help me, and I learned how to expand my portfolio, and eventually I started working in the industry professionally. But I guess the lesson and the takeaway from this is breaking in for everyone is different. But the main thing to know is that you need to practice whatever your particular craft is. You don't need to know everything, so you don't need to be every discipline. Just whatever your particular craft is, practice it within the realm of games. So if you're an engineer, then practice building games. If you're an artist, practice concepting or making environment art or character art, whatever it is, for games. Writers, for games, same deal. And start to build that portfolio and start to make connections with folks, and it'll happen for you.
I think one of the most fascinating things for me is how diverse games as an industry is as far as career backgrounds, where I have people I work directly with every single day who have backgrounds in teaching, in journalism, in epidemiology, in you name it. And all of those different backgrounds are interesting, and they add something new to your perspective. So if you have maybe kind of a not very straight and narrow career path to games, think about ways that you can actually lean into that and utilize that. How could that perspective make you a better dev? And think about that and try to leverage that really to the best of your abilities. I also just kind of want to parrot something that Lucas said about reaching out to folks and asking if they'll sit down and chat with you, because they will. And I would know because I've been on both sides of that call before. So it does happen, and it seems like a scary thing to do, like a crazy thing to do, but give it a shot. You never know.
And also, like, so many people helped me get my job that I feel like forever it is my pleasure to help people do the same thing. And so, I mean, anyone who watches this, send me a message on Twitter and I will be happy to meet with you for a call. I mean, truly, you know, this is, I feel like you will find that, I mean, not everyone, people are busy and whatever, but many people will be generous with their time because so many folks helped them get to where they were, that they'll feel happy to sort of pay that back. And I know that I am, for sure.
Please do not send people the message, "What is your secret?" I will reply with a terrible secret. You will not be able to unlearn it. And also, I don't know how to answer that. So it is a little confusing. It might be worth mentioning, since Mallory makes an excellent point about diverse backgrounds, which is one of the very fun things about games, to learn that your coworker has like 12 telescopes in their backyard, and like, yeah, just fun things like that. There's also a lot of diverse paths in terms of education. I know people who are brilliant graphics programmers who studied like physics or something, but not like, they didn't go to school for game dev. I have taken, I think, one creative writing class in an academic setting. I don't have an MFA. It sounds really fun, to be honest. I'd love to do that, but you know, don't, I guess, be put off by what you think you should look like as an ideal candidate.
Yes, spot on. Thank you so much for all your insight, everyone, and thank you for that question. So our next question is, so we just talked about that.
Wait, do you mind if I turn on the light really quick? I'm
yeah,
so
go
sorry.
for it. No worries. It is late here for us, y'all. So Yeah, bear with us. Okay, so our next question is, does having more experience, even in small indie projects, increase your chances of getting hired for a game writer position or any narrative position? So we touched on this a little bit, but just, I guess, briefly to be more specific about this question.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps a whole bunch. Like, even if it's not like a resume booster or something you don't want to put on your resume, being able to talk about team experiences that you've had, like good and bad, and how you worked through them in your process will be like so helpful if you get to like that interview phase and they want to hear more about your work. I definitely think it never hurts to like get more experience, even if you're not working on the most narrative heavy game. Like sometimes learning how to write on a game where story isn't the priority is a really important skill to learn and might pop up in your career path sooner than you think. Yeah, I definitely think there's no downer to working on indie games, indie projects, no matter how small the scope is.
Awesome. Okay, and our next question, still from my, is do writers and level designers collaborate? And if so, how? Yes, they do. And
Nailed it.
All the time, every day, constantly. We're always on a Skype call. I mean, 24/7. I'm working with level designers for sure. Yeah, and I mean, just a little bit more. So, you know, it's the level designers' jobs to create the spaces in the game, and it's the writer's job to. I mean, again, this sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of every level designer being different, because I have some level designers I work with who really, really thrive when I give them a lot of ideas for environmental storytelling. So like this space, let's have, you know, these pages scattered on the ground and a blood streak over here. Sorry, I'm working on Weird West. I'm only thinking about blood and werewolves and stuff.
If you don't have blood conversations with your area designer, are you even working in video games?
I don't think you are. Yeah, so, you know, sometimes level designers really, really, really love sort of like as many ideas as possible from me, and then they'll sort of pick what works, what they have the assets for, what sort of makes sense. But other level designers, I could say something like, okay, in this space, we need to communicate, we need to instill a sense of, we want the player to be scared in this space. We want it to be a scary space. And the one prompt is like, something really bad happened here 100 years ago. And some of them really love to come up with their own ideas and brainstorm together with you. So it sort of varies, but yeah, the short answer is yes, definitely all the time. And it's many times a sort of back and forth where the writer is offering lots of ideas for how to bring story through the spaces and the various tools that the level designer has, and then the level designer coming back and saying, well, actually, if we do it this way, the flow of the space is going to be all messed up. There's going to be too many spaces where there's not enough interactivity. So we need some more interactivity. What if we can bring some of these gameplay mechanics in? I really want to use this gameplay mechanic. Can you think of a sort of a narrative around why this gameplay mechanic would be in the space? And it's a sort of back and forth like that.
Especially in your like non-linear spaces. And I think non-linear gets thrown around a little more than maybe it ought, but you know, Outer Wilds is a really good example of this, where we couldn't control what order the found story, all of the little pieces of found text, we couldn't control what order that you encountered them in, but we could influence it. So knowing where things are being placed, how they're being encountered is really important, and you'll work usually with the level designer quite a lot on that.
Awesome. Mallory, were you going to say something?
I have a little brief thing, particularly in the world of adventure games and narrative games. A lot of, like, most of the interaction that your player is getting is through that look verb on various items around the space. And so that comes from your level designers and your environment artists populating a space to look interesting, and the story team can see a piece of GAC and decide that that's interesting and put a story on it. And now you're collaborating with those departments to make that into, like Lucas said, the kind of environmental storytelling. And then finally, that whole process, once everyone's happy with what we're doing, kind of ends with the character saying something. And in that way, you have a lot of departments working together on one tiny piece of the environment to tell a story with one line of VO and just an interesting object. And you're doing that 18, 20, 30 times, depending on how big your space is. So like Lucas said, it's just a constant collaboration. How can we make every little piece of this environment contribute to the game in a meaningful way? And there's just no way to do that without communication.
Absolutely. So keeping with the theme of arcs, rounding out Act 1 of our talk here, the last question from Amaya. What is usually the format chosen when writing a game script? It's a good question. I think we all probably have a
bothered me
different answer.
so much when I was taking my game writing course. All I wanted was to see a game writing script. I'm like, what does it look like? Tell me what it looks like. And no one knows. I think that it's a really interesting, this is a super interesting part of this industry. Like maybe every other form of writing has really established standards. There are books on the standards. Film is the easiest example, where there have been books on how to write an effective screenplay for years and years and years. There are amazing ones. There are some pretty agreed upon standards. Every film script looks exactly the same. I don't know how it is for you all, but in game writing, there are just so many different departments you're working with and so many different needs for what the text you write as a narrative designer that serves as the blueprint for other people to work from. It's because the narrative is non-linear. Sorry, Kelsey. But it is, like you were saying,
I hate this. So
yeah, because it's not, because the player gets to choose how they interact with spaces. It doesn't, the narrative can't go straight down the page like this. It's not linear in space and time in that way. So the truth is, for me, a lot of my narrative design documents are flowcharts. It's a lot of flowcharts. So like, this happens, here's a space, and here's environmental storytelling in this space, and then here's a thing the player has to do to get to this objective. But if they do this, then here's this other thing. So a lot of times I map it out that way. Other times it'll be a straight Word document where I'll describe sort of like chapter of play by chapter of play. Here's the space, and here's a sort of short description of the space. Here are the things that the player can do in this space. Here are the interactable objects. Here are a lot of the verbs we're working with. Here's some of the story flavor of what's happening. And here's the ultimate objective for the space that the player needs to do before moving on to the next space. But I am so curious what everyone else does, because it does not seem like there's an agreed upon standard yet, to my knowledge.
You want to get a good sense of what types, because it's all different types depending on need, basically. I've written essentially film scripts before. I'm guessing Milo probably has too. And I'm working right now in a proprietary editing system that Obsidian has that is dope. And that Carrie Patel and Dave Simchuk have a brilliant GDC talk on, I think from 2019. That's not the point. If you look at writers, a lot of writers for games will have online portfolios. And if you pull those up, you'll get a lot of really good examples of how you might format that information, both not only to convey to potential employers, but also like that. A lot of that comes from work we've generated during our time on particular games. So I think that's honestly, if you're looking to get a sense of what that might look like, or maybe the best way to format it, because there is no best way to format branching dialogue. I'll tell you that right now. I've used Twine, I've used like Word docs. It just, don't send anyone an XML file if they can't read XML files well. Don't do it. I made that mistake, and it worked out fine. But yeah, you can get a sense of it that way. It really takes a lot of different shapes.
Yeah, like everyone
Sorry,
said.
man, I was having a flashback for a second there.
Oh no, it's all good. It's funny you mentioned to go into people's portfolio sites. Once upon a time in the West, there was this studio that I really loved named Telltale, and a mutual friend of ours worked there. And she had a writing sample on her website, and that's how I learned. Well, I assumed that that's what game scripts look like.
What it looked like? I gotta know.
It was actually, honestly, I don't remember. I feel like it looked like a Word doc that had like different choices lined out, and they were all color coded. It was super neat and organized. Way more organized than the stuff.
Friend Mary Kenney.
It was.
She's fabulous.
She's
actually,
so amazing.
That's now my new advice. I changed my advice to go look at Mary Kenney's writing samples.
Do it, yeah. Like
solid advice.
I don't know if she still has them up there, but at the time she did, and it was so helpful for me. But my experience has been a little different. I've always doubled as a designer. So I started as a designer, and then I actually became a game writer. Like I wanted to be a game writer from the start, but it wasn't an option. So an opportunity opened up on the team I was on to be a game writer, and they were like, "Hey, we need you to make a story for this game." And I'm like, "Cool. Like, shall I use Final Draft or is that a Word doc?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'll figure it out." So being doubling as a designer, I also had to program it and put it in the game. So I just wrote the whole story in XML, which, like Kelsey was saying, is a nightmare because if, like, oh my gosh, if there's syntax errors, it breaks the whole thing and it's a whole mess.
I made a syntax error once in an XML file that my project director swore killed the player on startup. I'm not convinced this was my fault. Also, the project director was my brother, so like, huh?
It's just sibling rivalry. Yeah.
So some of this could just be me, being difficult, but you can go wrong in a hurry.
Yeah, but like, so yeah, like Lucas was saying, there is no industry standard. But I will say that like, for a lot of games that I wrote for, and when I was lead writer on The Simpsons, Tapped Out, not the show. I always have to say that because people are like, "You wrote for the show." I'm like, "No, calm down." It was the mobile game, which is still cool. You should play it. But anyway, so we used Excel. And we would use that to write all of our branching dialogue as well as our regular linear scripts. And we just have different tabs within there, and we made a proprietary tool within Excel that could import into the game. So I think that there isn't really a tool like Final Draft that you can learn so that when you get in the industry, you're already prepared for it. I would say the best thing to understand is the structure of story within games and how that interplays with gameplay. And that's the best way to prepare for it because they can teach you the tools. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your question. And friends, we've come to the end of our panel. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our amazing panelists for being here, sharing your expertise and your time and your experience and thoughts. And we hope that you all have an amazing rest of your time at PAX. Feel free to follow these folks online. Their social handles are on the screen. And thank you so much. We hope to see you around.